way of doing business. And I wanted to bring you to talk about some of that and how it's impacting our youth and opportunities in the community. So tell me a little bit about that transition and what impact it's having on the community.
In 2008, the legislature did two things. They changed the law, and part of the changing the law, which was Chapter 119, Section 51A, that's where 51A comes from. It actually comes from the state law, and that is reporting child abuse and neglect. And they changed the law, which part of that changing of the law was a change for the department, changing the name.
Okay.
So we went from the Department of Social Services to the Department of Children and Families.
Okay.
With that change in the law, it also gave the department a chance to look at our body of practice. How were we, what were the regulations, what were the policies that were driving the way we did our work? And it allowed the department to change some significant parts of our job in the work that we do. They changed the time frame for investigations. An investigation is when we get an allegation of abuse or neglect. And it allowed us to then change the time frame from that. The time frame had been 10 days, 10 calendar days to do an investigation. We don't work Saturdays and Sundays. So that really shortened down the time frame for when how long the worker had to do an investigation. How much information can you really gather to make a really critical decision in that short time frame. They changed that time frame to 15 days, and they changed it to 15 working days. So now the department and our staff have a much longer period of time to really make that do that critical work and really understand the dynamics that are going on. And we have a much longer time frame at that front end. The other change was what we call differential response. Not every family that had a report of child abuse and neglect, or a 51A, needed to have an investigation. What they needed was somebody to take a look at the case. So under differential response, the case can go in two different tracks. If it's a serious allegation, it can go to an investigation. If it's not as serious, but it's concerning, it can go for an initial assessment within the same time frame.
Okay.
Any family that has an initial assessment, at the end of that, there's a finding, but the finding is one of concern, not one of abuse or neglect. When a family is found to have an allegation of abuse and neglect that is supported, those families end up with listing in our case record as having a supported allegation. Families that have an initial assessment, they get a finding of concern, not a finding of abuse or neglect. So there's no supported allegation against those families. And that's a huge difference for us. So we've really changed the matrix for ourselves so that not every family comes in through that protective matrix, and not every family with a report of child abuse and neglect ends up with an investigation. At the end of the 15 days where we're doing an initial assessment, families can make a choice to either stay with us and get supportive services or not. At the end of an investigation, it's less than voluntary. If we do an investigation and we find out that there's concerns, significant concerns of abuse and neglect, where there's safety and danger issues, those families can't opt out and just say, we don't want to work with the department.
Okay.
So that's a huge change for families.
Now, what is the essential difference between a person having the choice and not having the choice? There's the person not having the choice. The person having the choice. Now, are they out of the system completely? Do you do any monitoring or follow-up? Is that something that they have an option to do? How does that work now? Because it seems like that person is out of your system, so to speak.
Some of those families can stay within our system. Some of those families, we refer them to the community.
Okay.
So there are places like Dorchester Cares, Family Nurturing Center in Dorchester, Boston Children's Services. There are a variety of agencies that can provide supportive services and help to families.
Okay.
Now, those families who stay with us because they have a supported allegation, then they get an array of services that we purchase on their behalf.
Okay. So would you say that DCF is a resource to help, to protect, or more of a monitoring agency to be sure that abuse to children and things of that nature doesn't occur?
We're trying to get out of the monitoring business.
Okay.
We're trying not to be that kind of watchdog and waiting for the next thing to happen.
Okay.
Where there's serious concerns, where there's safety and danger issues, those are cases that really require the state's intervention.
Okay.
Where there's other issues that really don't require the state's intervention, then we want to kind of connect those families to more traditional faith-based or community-based resources to support those families. Some of those families are already in trouble. If we don't provide them with something, things aren't going to get better necessarily. They're potentially going to get worse.
So things can go from a civil situation to a criminal situation?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we don't want that to happen if we can avoid it. But those families where there's serious issues of safety and danger, those are the families that we really need to be involved in.
Okay. Now one of the concerns before is DCF just taking kids out the house. Now, is that still a part of your practice, or that's now dependent on your findings after your investigation?
It's always been contingent on our findings. I think the difference is that we had one way in. Every family who got reported, if there was a concern, they got an investigation. And depending on the nature of that investigation, we may remove the children or not. In the cases that we currently are involved in as protective cases, those are serious cases.
Okay.
And so we already know that those children have been abused and neglected. The question is, what's the relative safety and danger going forward? And if we can't determine that the kids can be safely maintained at home and in the community, we have to then remove them. We can't leave kids at risk.
Okay. Now I'm going to switch to Mr. Allen for a minute, because Mr. Allen helps another type of youth, and these are youth that have difficulty staying in school, drop out, and then Mr. Allen has that onerous responsibility of helping to redirect them, so that they don't become part of the DCF pool of children at risk. So I wanted to talk to you, Mr. Allen, for a minute. Now, the youth that you reach out to, what is the approximate age range of those youngsters?
On average,
Yeah.
I would say anywhere from 14 to 23.
You still help them at 23?
We still help them, and we help them, period. There's adults that come in. Sometimes parents come in. Sometimes students come in and their parents still haven't received their GED or high school diploma. So there's been cases where we've talked to people who are 40, even 50, who are still looking to get back on track. So basically, there isn't really an age limit either way. We've talked to middle school students also. But on average, the average person who comes into the re-engagement center, which is where we help them, it's the Boston Public Schools Engagement Center, on average, they're from 14 to 23.
Okay.